It was the floorboard creak that first caught my attention. A faint noise, almost imperceptible at first, but enough to disturb the silence of the night. I had just settled into bed, my phone buzzing with a random notification, when it happened. Again, the unmistakable sound of something shifting beneath me. My heart skipped a beat, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the age of the house. But as the minutes ticked by, the creaking grew louder, more deliberate. At first, I thought it was my imagination running wild. But when I decided to investigate, things only got worse. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I walked over to the floorboard, where the sound originated, and hesitated. My hand trembled as I crouched down, pulling at the floorboard, expecting to see nothing. Instead, a draft of cold air blew out, accompanied by an unsettling sound, a low hum like a distant, deep groan. My heart pounded in my chest. Suddenly, the air became suffocating, and the room grew darker, despite the lights being on. I froze in place. A shadow, like a figure, flickered in the corner of my vision. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, ready to record the madness unfolding before me. But as I opened the camera, my phone screen went black. No matter how much I tapped or shook it, it refused to work. And then, a voice, whispering just beyond my reach, muttered, "Get out, before it gets you." I didn't need to look again to know what was beneath the house. I had built my life on top of something far worse than I could have ever imagined. I had always thought of myself as a practical person, someone who believed in logic, science, and the comforting assurance that everything had a reasonable explanation. It's why, when I stumbled upon this old, run-down house at an estate sale, I wasn't particularly fazed by its age or its mysterious history. I was a new graduate, eager to begin a fresh chapter of my life. The house, an old Victorian-style building, had seen better days, no doubt. The walls were stained with years of wear, the windows cracked, and the floorboards creaked like they were holding on to memories of another time. But it was perfect for me. A small yard, a quiet street in a town far away from the bustle of city life, and, most importantly, affordable. I moved in with excitement and dreams of transforming the place into my own little sanctuary. I spent days cleaning, painting, and getting to know every crevice and corner of my new home. The house quickly became my retreat, a place to escape the pressures of daily life. But beneath the surface of this quiet, unassuming house, something was not quite right. At first, I dismissed the small occurrences, the odd creaks in the night, the cold spots in certain rooms, the way the lights flickered just before I went to bed. Nothing alarming, just the quirks of an old building. But over time, those small disturbances began to escalate. The sense of unease that lingered in the air grew stronger, like a shadow that refused to leave, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. And then, the noises started. More than just the creaks of an old house. Something, or someone, was moving under the floorboards. And it wasn't long before I realized that the house I had chosen to call home was built on top of something much darker than I could have ever imagined. Something ancient, something that had been waiting. And now, it was awake. The old Victorian house stood at the far end of a quiet street, far enough from the town center that its presence seemed almost hidden from the rest of the world. Surrounded by tall, gnarled trees and overgrown hedges, it looked like something straight out of a forgotten dream. Its once gleaming white exterior had faded over the years, now a dull shade of gray. A high-pitched roof with missing shingles loomed over a wraparound porch, where the railing sagged from years of neglect. Despite its condition, the house had an undeniable charm. The windows, though cracked, framed picturesque views of the dense woods that surrounded the property. The air was always thick with the scent of pine and the earthy fragrance of damp soil after a storm. The street itself was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hum of a passing car. Yet there was an almost oppressive stillness about the place that I couldn't shake. It was a home, but also something more, a place where time felt like it stood still. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the walls lined with faded wallpaper that had seen better days. The floors were worn, their wooden surfaces polished by years of footsteps. The smell of dust mixed with the faint scent of something else, something old and musty, lingered in the corners of the rooms. There was a certain heaviness to the house, as if the building itself carried a history it didn't want to share. The living room had a fireplace that looked as if it hadn't been used in decades, the hearth cold and filled with remnants of soot. The furniture, though outdated, had a strange familiarity about it, as if it had once been placed exactly where it belonged but had since been forgotten. Upstairs, the bedrooms were no better. The wallpaper peeled in places, and the floors creaked underfoot, each step echoing in the silence. My own bedroom was located at the very end of the hall, a small room with a narrow window that looked out over the yard. I had grown fond of the room's quaint charm, the way the light filtered through the curtains during the day, casting soft, golden hues across the walls. But beneath all the charm, beneath the creaks and cracks of an aging house, something was stirring. It wasn't just the noises that kept me up at night, or the sudden cold drafts that sent a shiver up my spine. It was the sense of something watching me, something just out of reach, hidden in the very foundation of the house, something I couldn't yet name. And as the days passed, the house began to reveal its true nature to me. What had seemed like an ordinary, albeit old, structure was slowly becoming something else, a dark, unsettling force that seemed to be pushing me towards the truth. The first strange occurrence was subtle, easy to overlook. It happened late one night, just after I had finished up some work and was preparing to head to bed. I had been sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint noise, a tapping, coming from beneath the floorboards. I paused, confused. At first, I thought it was the usual settling of the house. Old homes creak and groan, after all. But the tapping persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingers drumming against wood. It was too precise to be an accident, too consistent to be ignored. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and made my way to the hallway, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. The house felt different tonight, darker somehow. My footsteps echoed as I approached the kitchen, where the sound seemed to originate. I bent down, shining the flashlight beneath the floor, but the beam of light revealed nothing, just the worn wood and the occasional crack or split in the planks. But then, just as I was about to rise, the tapping stopped. There was a brief silence, and then a low hum began. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it grew louder with every passing second. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind or some trick of the house settling. But as the hum intensified, it became clear that it was something far more unsettling. The sound wasn't natural. It was almost alive. My heart raced, and I pulled myself up, backing away slowly. And then, the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, scratching against the floorboards. As the days wore on, the incidents grew more frequent and harder to ignore. At first, it was just the tapping, always at night, just as I was about to fall asleep. But soon, other things began to happen. I would find items moved from their places, the bathroom light flickering sporadically, and the mirrors would fog up for no reason at all, despite there being no steam in the air. One night, I woke to a sound unlike any I had heard before, something dragging across the floor. It wasn't just the floorboards creaking, it was something much heavier, like furniture being moved across the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay frozen in my bed, listening to the noise getting closer. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I didn't know if I should get up and confront whatever was in my room or stay hidden beneath the covers, praying that it would just go away. But it didn't. The sound came closer, and then nothing. Absolute silence. I didn't dare move for what felt like an eternity. When I finally worked up the courage to peek out from under the covers, I saw nothing, just the quiet, empty room. But that was when I realized the house was never truly empty. Something had been here long before I arrived. As the days turned to weeks, my paranoia began to take hold. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. The house, once a refuge, had become a prison, and I was its captive. My phone screen flickered, always showing odd, cryptic images. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of whispers, always just outside my door, always faint and undecipherable. I couldn't escape. It was as if the house had claimed me. But that night, the night I went into the basement, everything changed. I had finally gathered enough courage to investigate the source of the noises once and for all. The basement, hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, seemed like the last place I needed to go. But something deep inside me knew the answers were down there. The truth was worse than I could have ever imagined. The house wasn't built on just land. It was built on top of something far more ancient. The basement, I learned, had been a place of rituals, of sacrifices, of things long forgotten. As I stood there, the weight of the U. Past pressing in on me, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The house wasn't just built on something terrifying. It was alive, feeding on my fear. I wasn't the first to live here, and I wouldn't be the last. The whispers would continue long after I was gone. And somewhere, deep beneath the house, something was waiting. By the time the photos started to show up on my phone daily, sometimes every few hours, I had already lost all sense of reality. It wasn't just the images anymore. It wasn't just the figure creeping ever closer to me in every snapshot. The events surrounding me had escalated beyond anything I could understand, beyond anything I could fight. At night, the figure no longer appeared only in the photos. I could see it, in my peripheral vision, standing in the corners of the room. I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Each time I turned, it would vanish, but the dread remained. Sleep had become a luxury. It was rare for me to sleep for more than an hour or two, and when I did manage to close my eyes, the nightmares began. In these dreams, the figure wasn't just a silent observer. It moved. It followed me. It whispered in my ear, but no words were ever clear. It was only the haunting sound of its breath, heavy and slow, echoing in my mind long after I woke up. But that night, it was different. I had just deleted the latest batch of photos and tried to distract myself with a movie, hoping the light and sound would break the oppressive silence that had taken over my apartment. But there was something in the air, a shift. The moment I sat down, the temperature dropped, and a deep silence filled the space, as though the apartment itself had been holding its breath. I felt it before I saw it. The pressure in the room, like the walls themselves were closing in, and then the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I looked up from the screen. The air seemed to shimmer, distort, like a heat wave on a summer day. And then I saw it. The figure, standing in the doorway of my living room. It wasn't like before. This time, it was solid, real. No longer just a blur in the corner of my eye or a flicker in the photos. It stood there, watching me, its tall, shadowy form framed by the dim light from the hallway. I could see the outline of its body clearly now, the unnatural stillness of it. I froze. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But there was no mistaking its presence. It was real, and it was waiting. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart raced in my chest, but it was as if my body was paralyzed. I reached for my phone, trembling, and snapped a picture, my hand unsteady as I aimed the camera at the figure. The phone beeped in response, but this time, there was no photo, only a message. "You've been looking for me." I dropped the phone, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The words burned into my mind as I stared at the figure in front of me. For the first time, I felt it. This wasn't just an intruder in my space. This was something far worse. I don't know what I expected, but this wasn't it. This wasn't the kind of thing you could explain away. This wasn't a glitch or a bad connection. It was alive, real, and terrifying. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. But it was as if the words had been swallowed by the air itself, swallowed by the silence. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath it. Each step was deliberate, heavy with the weight of its presence. It moved slowly, as though savoring every moment of my terror. My heart hammered in my chest. The instinct to run kicked in, but my feet wouldn't cooperate. I was stuck, frozen in place, as the figure grew closer and closer. And then, as if the air itself was suffocating me, it spoke. "I'm not the one who's been haunting you," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from all around me, not just from its mouth. The words reverberated through my mind, rattling my thoughts. "You've been searching for me, but you're looking in the wrong place." The figure reached up, slowly, deliberately, and touched its face. The skin was smooth, too smooth, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something. A mask, a layer that didn't belong. And then it ripped its face off. I stumbled back in horror, my breath caught in my throat. What was underneath wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could describe. It was a swirling mass of darkness, a void where a face should be, shifting and morphing like smoke in the wind. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. I wanted to run, but my legs were paralyzed. But then, it spoke again. "It's not me you should be afraid of. It's you." Those words were the final blow to my sanity. The figure wasn't the thing I had been chasing. It wasn't the cause of the photos. It wasn't the one who had been watching me. I had been looking at the wrong thing all along. And that was the moment the truth hit me. The real horror wasn't in what was haunting me. It was in what I had become. I had been so obsessed with finding answers, with understanding the photos, the messages, the presence, that I had failed to realize the truth. The true horror was inside me. As the figure stood before me, its void-like face pulsing and writhing in an incomprehensible pattern, I understood what had been happening all along. The photos weren't just images of a figure that didn't belong. They were reflections of me, of my growing terror, my isolation, my fear manifesting into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. But there was one last twist, one last truth that I couldn't escape. The figure stepped closer, its voice a whisper now. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Suddenly, I was no longer in my apartment. The world around me dissolved into nothingness, and I was falling, tumbling through an endless void. There were no walls, no floor, just darkness and the sound of the figure's voice echoing in my mind. "You're a part of it now," it said, and then everything went black. This marks the culmination of the protagonist's journey into horror, where everything they believe to be true is shattered. The confrontation with the figure, the revelation of what it truly represents, and the twist that redefines the nature of the haunting all culminate in a chilling and intense climax. Feel free to expand upon these ideas, focusing on the protagonist's internal breakdown, the confusion and terror as they realize they are part of a larger, more sinister phenomenon.